Hi, I'm Ariel. I'm excited to talk about books today. I wanted to share my reading wrap up for all the books that I read January through March. I read a total of 10 books. Let's get started with January. I started off the year with Lady Tan's Circle of Women by Lisa C. This is a historical fiction set in ancient China. It's based on a book of treatments that was published by a female physician, and Lisa C creates a fictional narrative imagining how Lady Tan might have met all these women and come to learn all these treatments. I love historical fiction because you always get to learn something, and I think that Lisa C's books are really well researched and you get a lot of cultural depth and insight, which I really enjoy. I gave it 3 stars at the time because I had just finished reading Sense and Sensibility, which I'd given 4 stars, and I was like, felt like it couldn't quite match that, but I think now I'm a little bit more lenient. I probably would have given it 4 stars, and I can't get into half stars because that's just too much to worry about. That was technically the only book that I finished in January, but I started a few others in February and then finished them towards the beginning of the month, so let's look at those. The next book I read was Snowflower and the Secret Fan, also by Lisa C. This book is also set in ancient China, and this time it follows Snowflower and Lily over the course of their lives. This book was really enjoyable. I felt like not as much as Peony in Love, which was the first book by her that I read, and Lady Tan, which I had just read in January. And I think there's still a lot of great historical depth, and you still learn a lot about ancient Chinese culture. And the book was inspired by the Nushu writing system, which was created by women to communicate exclusively with other women. Lisa C did a lot of research on that, which I thought was cool to read about at the end. Similar to her other novels, it explores themes of female friendship and connection. I thought what made this one a little bit different was kind of the focus on a different class. A lot of the other books are focused on wealthier classes in ancient China, and this one you get a little bit of that, but also someone from maybe a lower class, and that contrast was really interesting, and that dynamic between Snowflower and Lily was really interesting to see it play out. The next book I read, I actually listened to on Spotify, and that is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This was originally written in 1847. It's a mysterious gothic romance novel that's kind of a coming of age story for Jane Eyre. You follow her through a couple different points in her life, and I think the best part of this for me was Charlotte Bronte's writing style. It was very lyrical and descriptive and very flowery language, but I really enjoyed that. I wanted to share a favorite quote from the book. There was a lot of lovely writing, but when I listened to this just really stood out to me. It's towards the end of the book, so skip forward just a little bit if you don't want any spoilers. Hopeless of the future, I wished but this, that my Maker had that night thought good to require my soul of me while I slept, and that this weary frame, absolved by death from further conflict with fate, had now but to decay quietly and mingle in peace with the soil of this wilderness. Life, however, was yet in my possession, with all its requirements and pains and responsibilities. The burden must be carried, the want provided for, the suffering endured, the responsibility fulfilled. I set out. Overall, the story itself for Jane Eyre I did enjoy. I felt a bit suspicious and uncomfortable with the main love interest, but I still enjoyed it and ultimately really enjoyed the romance between them and thought this was a really good book. So the next book I started is actually a DNF. It's A Song to Drown Rivers by Anne Liang, and this is a Chinese historical fantasy inspired by the legend of Zixi. This was recommended to me by a friend after I was talking about Lisa C's novels and being intrigued by fantasy, and I can see conceptually why I might have liked it, but I it just wasn't for me. I got about 50 pages in and I didn't find the main heroine very engaging or interesting. There was some insta love that I thought wasn't that interesting, and the main heroine mostly just talked about how pretty she was, but that she was humble about it. And then all of a sudden they decide to make her concubine assassin spy. I don't know. I wasn't that into it and I didn't finish it, but I'm glad that other people like it. So that DNF felt like the start of a little bit of a downhill reading quality time for me. After I DNF'd A Song to Drown Rivers in March, I finished reading Go as a River by Shelley Reed. Go as a River is a historical fiction set between the 1940s to 1960s on a Colorado peach farm. I think that my expectation of what this book was going to be just didn't line up with reality, and I also wouldn't have finished it unless I wouldn't have finished it, but I felt a bit guilty since I didn't finish A Song to Drown Rivers, so I wanted to keep going with it. But I did not enjoy the first 100 pages. There is also some insta-love in this book, and I didn't feel like you really got to know Victoria, the main character, or her thoughts, and I just didn't love it. I did enjoy, I think Reed had really descriptive writing, and I enjoyed her descriptions of peaches and the Colorado landscape, but the plot itself wasn't very strong. The second half of the book was better, or the last 2/3 were a bit better than the first part, but it also felt like the way that they used the Native American character felt kind of exploitative. It was not for me, but I think I was also looking for more cultural historical insight that I didn't really get, and wanted to learn more about peaches. Learning bits about peaches and the peach farm were the best parts for me. That was really fun. I am disappointed because the cover design of this book is so beautiful, but it also was not for me. The next book I read was also an audiobook on Spotify, and that is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I was really excited to read this because I had read Charlotte Bronte and I was curious about Emily, them being sisters, and I do in the future plan to read Anne Bronte's. I plan to read all three sisters' books because I'm curious how their books and writing styles and experiences play out. This one was also a buddy listen with one of my friends who had read it before in high school, but she was like, oh, I didn't really get a chance to appreciate it, so I'm curious how it would be now. And I think it's fascinating that this is a classic novel. I think if it wasn't a buddy read, if I didn't know it was a classic and I hadn't also been let down by 2 other books, I wouldn't have kept reading it. I think I was like, am I the problem? Like, I'm not liking all of these books. Is it me or is it the book? I don't know. So Wuthering Heights is also a gothic novel. I wouldn't call it a romance, although I feel like it's been pitched as a romance, and fascinating to me that they're turning it into a Valentine's Day movie next year. The romances in Wuthering Heights are very, very toxic. This book talks a lot about generational trauma, and the characters are extremely unlikable. One of the characters is compared to the devil, and I can see why. There could have been a lot more to it that I couldn't see through, but I couldn't deal with how awful the characters were. It made it really hard to read the whole book. After finishing Wuthering Heights, I really needed a breather, something light, something fun, and that's when I found Watermoon by Samantha Sato Yambao. And Watermoon is a very whimsical, delightful book where Hana takes over her father's pawn shop in Tokyo. This is a pawn shop where people come to sell regrets, so it's very fantastical and interesting. There's a lot of themes of fate versus choice, which I thought was really interesting throughout the book. I loved the setting, the whimsical world building, and this was also a really fun book to read. It was really easy. I read it pretty quickly. There is one page, one paragraph that has some spice to it. As a heads up, I did not expect it going into it. I loved reading the whole book. It was the ending that I was a little bit disappointed by, not in how it ended, like plot-wise, but I didn't love the way that it felt like the climax just stopped right in the middle of it, and then we picked up again in almost a time skip just to resolve everything else that happened. Other than that, it was such a fun read. It was a perfect cleanser post Wuthering Heights, and I am excited to look for more kind of whimsical, magical fantasy books. Next, I listened to I Want to Die, But I Want to Eat Tteokbokki by Baek Se-hee. This was a spontaneous suggestion from Spotify, but it was a pretty short book, so I went for it. This is a series of transcriptions from Baek Se-hee's psychiatry appointments. It's mostly just the transcriptions of her audio recordings and a little bit of reflections at the end of each chapter and a little bit at the end of the book as well. And I thought it was really interesting to get insight. This was translated from Korean. Baek Se-hee is South Korean, and I'd seen some K-dramas where they have psychiatry appointments, and I was curious if that reflected reality. So I was interested to hear about how those appointments went, and I thought this was very vulnerable of Baek Se-hee to share her thoughts that she's sharing with her therapist and put that out into the world. I didn't necessarily relate to every single thing that she had gone through, but I think it is still helpful to listen to someone else's experiences and then like reflect on your own mental health and thought patterns, cognitive distortions, and did really appreciate it for that. This was interesting and quick to read, but not necessarily profoundly insightful if you're looking towards it as a self-help book per se. Next, I read Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This is a dystopian classic written in 1932. The first half of the book was all world building. It was really strong world building, and post that, the whole time I think I wasn't sure where the book was going necessarily, but it was very thematically driven, I would say, more so than like the plot or a character specifically. You kind of go between a couple characters. And the most interesting part of this book, I thought, was chapter 3 or so. Huxley is writing, and there's kind of some simultaneous conversations going on. You end up going back and forth between a bunch of them. That was my favorite part of the book. I do enjoy dystopian books in general for their commentary. I think it's interesting how there's a lot of similarities between societies. A lot of these dystopian classics were written a long time ago, but their commentary is still the same kind of rhetoric that you hear today. There were themes of government control, overconsumption, hypersexual society, sexualization of children. So it was interesting to see those written from a book almost 100 years old and things that are still people talking about today. For me, think there are better dystopian classics out there, but I was curious to read this one, and I haven't read a dystopian classic in a long time, so I did enjoy getting back into that a little bit. Next, I read Pachinko by Min Jin Lee, and I love this book. I thought it was so well done, so well researched in terms of like you could tell she talked about doing interviews with many Korean Japanese people, and you could really see that reflected in the depth of what she told characters' stories. I didn't expect to enjoy her writing style so much. It's very straightforward. She said she was trying to be a very objective narrator, but I thought that it was very engaging nonetheless. Ravioli is here to say hi while we're talking in case you see him. In Pachinko, you follow a Korean family through multiple generations. You start in Korea in 1910 and end in Japan in 1989, I believe. I thought it was so interesting seeing this whole family's journey over time. I learned so much. I enjoy watching Korean dramas, so I had seen the topic of Japanese occupation and Japanese people's somewhat prejudice against Korean people, and I'd seen that touched on in dramas but not gone into in depth, so I thought this was a really interesting way to learn more about that topic through, I guess, the micro lens of someone's multiple people's individual lives instead of like a macro conceptual theory topic. This was a great book for me. I borrowed it from the library, but immediately after finishing it, I felt like I really needed to own it, and I want to buy it, and I want all the people I know to read it so I can talk about it. I really enjoyed Pachinko. The final book I read in March, I finished on March 31st and got it just squeaked in there, was Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This was such a fascinating fantasy mystery book. I don't know how to describe it completely, and I would say if you're interested, don't go in having looked up too much. Just maybe read the first page or so and see how you feel about that. It's told through scientific journal entries. The main character thinks of himself as a scientist, and he's recording all of these events in the world around him. The setting is so fascinating, very otherworldly and mysterious. You don't know much about the character. He doesn't know much about himself. The end of the book really kind of brings together some of the themes of searching for one's identity, and I had a lot to reflect on after I read it, and I really enjoyed that. It was just such an engaging, engrossing, fantastical read without being high fantasy or sci-fi. I think it's technically speculative fiction, but it was really cool. Almost Greek mythology inspired, but not really. There's a lot of statues that give off Greek mythology vibes, and I loved it. This was a great book and a great way to end the month. Lately, I've been thinking about starting a little mobile book truck, and I don't think this is something that would come into fruition for a little while, but I was thinking about these reads and I thought it'd be fun to talk about which of these books I would want to sell on my book truck if that came to fruition. So starting off, Lady Tan's Circle of Women I would definitely include. I feel like it's a historical fiction that a lot of people can enjoy, and it was great. Definitely Lady Tan. I think I would include Jane Eyre. It's very interesting, beautiful writing, and I think it'd be interesting to include it with The Wide Sargasso Sea, I think it's called. I haven't read that book yet, but that is a more modern book, kind of companion to Jane Eyre, told from another character's perspective, and I think that would be cool to have those go together. I would include Water Moon. I think it's such a fun fantasy, fun read, very whimsical, as I said. Pachinko, hands down, yes, that would go on the truck, front and center, loved it. And Piranesi also, I think it's really great. I think it has a lot of wide appeal to a lot of people. I can see lots of different people enjoying Piranesi, and I think that'd be a lot of fun. Thank you so much for watching. I really enjoyed getting to chat about all these books. I would love to know what you've been reading, if you have any recommendations you think I would enjoy based on these reads and my thoughts on them. If you want to follow along as I'm reading things, I update my story graph really regularly, so I'll have it linked below, and I will see you soon.